What's going on, guys? This is TrendKiLL. We gotta go fast. Welcome back to Know Your Enemy. New to the series and need to know what it's about? Check out my NEEF guide. New to the game and need a crash course? Check out my beginner's guides. Otherwise, Mercury. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is take a look at Mercury's graph. Obviously, at a very quick glance, you can see that this graph is extremely lopsided. Mercury is an assassin, therefore innately his healing and defense are going to be extremely low. You can see healing doesn't even exist on this graph. His utility is also very low, meaning that his abilities are very simple, or they do one thing very well but may not do a ton of other things. Now, if we look at the heavy side of the graph, you can see that Mercury's damage, mobility, and control are very high. Now, those three stats combined is an extremely nasty combo. What this means is that Mercury's going to be able to get into a fight, control the fight the entire time, get a kill, and get out with next to no problem. Now, because of the high amount of control that he has, he's also very good in a one-on-one situation when fighting another assassin. So let's take a look at his abilities and we'll find out why this chart looks the way it does. So let's start off with his passive, Fastest God Alive. This is an interesting passive. It grants him physical power based on the amount of distance that he has traveled. Now, not only does walking around the map add to this passive, also his dash and his ultimate are going to add to this passive, and we'll talk about that here in a second. In addition to that part of the passive, he also gains 25% of all movement speed from items and abilities in physical power. So the faster he is, the more damage he's going to do. Now, this also includes active items like sprint and buffs like the speed buff. So not only is Mercury going to be wanting to build physical power items, he's also going to want to be as fast as possible, which makes him really hard to get away from. Alright, now let's take a look at Mercury's main four abilities. He does not have a very complex kit, so we're just going to touch on the highlights. First off, his Made You Look. This at first glance seems just like a ground-targeted AoE type of effect. However, understand that this ability is unlike any other ability in the game in the fact that this is treated like a long-ranged AoE auto attack. Now, this means two things. One, this ability is unlike any other ability in the game in the fact that it scales off of your basic attack power, not your physical power. So that means this scales off the amount of damage that one of your basic attacks will do. In addition to that, this ability can crit, so the amount of poke damage that this ability is capable of is very high. Moving on to his second ability, Maximum Velocity. This ability is very simple. It is a buff, otherwise known as a steroid. It gives him two things, a passive buff of 2 to 10% movement speed, and an attack speed buff of 30 to 70% when he activates it. Now, I want to make sure I clarify this. The passive gives you movement speed, not the active. I see a lot of new Mercury players using their 2 to try to catch up to an enemy that's running away from them when the active portion of the second ability does nothing for movement speed. Now, his third ability, Special Delivery, is a rare form of an ability. There's only a couple in the game, and this ability, he dashes towards somebody, spins them around, and throws them in any direction he chooses. So you've got to be very careful early game, actually pretty much all game, with Special Delivery because Mercury can really choose where he wants you to be. This is where the control portion of that graph comes into play. Also, remember I talked about his passive being adjusted by his 3 and his ultimate. That is because when he dashes using his 3, that counts as distance traveled. Now, I'm not saying if you're playing Mercury that you want to run around and dash around to get your passive built up before you punch somebody. It's just something that you should be aware of. And finally, Mercury's ultimate. If you haven't played Mercury before and you haven't seen how his ultimate works, it is definitely worth a look. This is one of the funnest, neatest, and probably most fitting ultimates in the game. Now, other than the mechanics section, there's not much to say about this ability other than the fact that it has its own type of CC called Disorient. Essentially, this form of CC is a 1.5 second stun that during the stun spins you around, and after 1.5 seconds, you're pointed in a completely different direction than you were originally. So understand that this ability can add a lot of confusion to an early gank or a late game team fight if you happen to hit 2 or 3 people. Those 2 or 3 people may not know where they are when the Disorient is finished, and that might turn the tides in your team's favor. Alright, so welcome to the mechanics section. This is the part of the video where we're going to take a look at things that you may see as you're playing against Mercury. So for starters, let's take a look at Made You Look. So for my first tip, remember I told you that this ability is capable of doing a ton of poke damage, and it does it from a very safe distance for Mercury. Now at the risk of making this video obsolete should the meta change, in today's current meta, the jungler will almost always follow the solo laner into the solo lane after they clear a couple buffs. Now this is done for several reasons, almost all of which are outside of the scope of these beginner style videos, so we can talk about that at a later date in a different guide. However, just understand that in the current meta, you should almost always see a jungler following the solo laner into the solo lane to create a duo lane for the first few levels of the game. Now during this phase, Mercury will be very aggressive with his Made You Look, trying to keep you guys as low on health as possible. What this does is it puts your solo laner and your jungler behind because they don't have the HP to be as aggressive as the enemy team does. Now this may lead to them losing gold to the tower or experience because they have to back too early. If they do have to back, your jungler may be off rhythm with his jungle route, so there's a lot of things that can happen if you get outpoked early by a Mercury. So be very careful and understand that Mercury is still very capable of doing high amounts of damage in these low levels. Now for my second tip, and I don't usually talk about items in these guides, however, I think it's important to mention Golden Bow. This is kind of a point of contention on Mercury for some of the higher level players. Some of them build it, some of them don't. But to add to the poking potential of his Made You Look, remember that this kind of counts as a long-ranged AoE auto attack. But with Golden Bow, when you hit somebody with a basic attack, everybody within a 15-foot radius of that target takes 50% of that auto attack's damage. So when you turn that auto attack into an AoE, every single person that's hit in that AoE will splash 50% of that damage to everybody else that's hit in that radius. So this item specifically just amplifies the amount of poke damage that he's able to do, plus it really ups his jungle time and his wave clear time and gives him a little more presence in a team fight. Now am I telling you that it's an absolute necessity to build Golden Bow on Mercury? Absolutely not. However, it is a common item built on Mercury, and if you start getting hit with splash damage from auto attacks that aren't even aimed at you, now you know why. And for the last tip on Mercury, understand that Mercury has to have line of sight on you to use Made You Look, which means that he cannot use this ability through walls or inside walls. So if you do happen to be playing against a Mercury, taking sharp turns around corners and staying against walls is a good way to stay protected from Made You Look. Now, unfortunately, the bad news about staying close to a wall has to do with his third ability, Special Delivery. Remember, he can grab you with his ability and throw you in any direction he chooses. That includes right into a wall. So a lot of the times you may see Mercury grab you with Special Delivery, throw you right into the wall. That way he doesn't have to chase you to continue punching you. You're flying in the air against a wall and he can punch you the entire time. Also, a lot of the times you'll see Mercury combo his Special Delivery with Made You Look. So he'll throw you in a direction and then throw Made You Look on the ground right where you're landing and hit you with both abilities without you being able to do anything about it. And by the time he combos that with his second ability, Maximum Velocity, you're taking a ton of damage. Now if you do happen to get away from all that, again, he's still got his ultimate Sonic Boom and he can chase you down with that. So again, Mercury is very hard to get away from, and this is exactly why he's got a ton of control. Now with all that being said, playing against Mercury just sounds terrible at this point. However, there is some good news with Special Delivery. When he dashes in and grabs you, you are essentially stunned for 1 second before he throws you. However, Mercury is also essentially stunned. Neither of you can do anything. While that sucks for you, it also makes Mercury extremely susceptible to CC or damage while he's trying to throw you. So if you happen to be playing a god that has some hard CC like a silence or a stun, and you see somebody getting thrown by Mercury, that stun will save their life. One, it makes Mercury extremely susceptible to damage, and two, it breaks that ability. Now on top of that, Mercury uses his dash as an escape. However, as soon as he hits somebody, he will stop and throw them around. Now this is very bad for Mercury. Most dashes in the game will go through people. Not only does Mercury's dash stop when he hits somebody, it also basically stuns him for 1 second and he stands in place. So if a Mercury is trying to get away, make sure you try to stand in front of him so he's got nowhere to go. Alright, so by now you've seen a ton of clips of me using Sonic Boom, his ultimate. Now we've talked about Thor in the past, and one sneaky thing about Thor is the fact that he can ult up in the air and come crashing down past your wards where you will not be able to see him. Mercury has a similar mechanic in the fact that he can use his Sonic Boom from way away where you don't think he's an issue, and all of a sudden he's in the fight. So while it's not going to be sneaky and get him past wards, it can get him into a team fight much faster than you think. and if you're not paying attention to what's going on behind you, there's a good chance that he could ult into the fight without you ever even knowing he was there. If you want an estimate on how far Mercury can travel, Mercury can basically travel from one mid tower to the other. So that is the distance that you always have to be aware of when you're facing a Mercury. Another thing about this ability is the fact that he can use his ultimate to get through towers without being targeted. Now this could be to pick somebody off, this could be to get away from somebody. There could be a lot of reasons why you may want to dash through towers. You could be coming up behind a lane in between the first and second towers and dash through the first tower behind somebody for an extra element of surprise. So just remember, if that Mercury is Phoenix diving you for whatever reason behind 2 towers and he's at 10 health and he's got his ult fully charged, he can possibly get through those 2 towers without any problem. Now, is that going to happen often? Probably not, but it is a possibility. Now, I've got 2 more tips, but the last one we're going to talk about for Sonic Boom, understand that Mercury can choose the distance of this ability. It is a slow charge that over time, the length of that ability gets longer and longer. So when Mercury ults, he's got one of 2 decisions. Do I want to ult through them to where I can still do damage, disorient them, and still be safe when I'm finished? Or do I want to ult to them, just barely ult past them, turn around and be right there to fight them? Now, either way, there's not much that you can do about it. I guess this tip is more for somebody who's playing Mercury. That is a decision you're going to have to make. Do I have enough health to ult in right on top of somebody and punch them, or should I use my ultimate to get through them and be a safe distance away when I'm finished? And the last tip I have is for his second ability, Maximum Velocity. Now, first off, I cannot stress enough that using this ability, activating this ability, does not give you a speed boost. You've got to be very careful thinking that his 2 is going to give you a speed boost, trying to chase somebody down, and then them realizing, wait, did he just use his Maximum Velocity to try to catch up to me? And now they know that you do not have that ability at your disposal. They may turn around on you. But the real tip that I wanted to talk about is the fact that Mercury is an absolute tower killer. He is one of the best split pushers in the game due to the fact that he's got a ton of mobility so he can get in and out, and he kills towers so quickly. Mid to late game, if you allow a Mercury to get into your tower with a full minion wave, it's likely he's going to kill that tower unless you are there to stop him. If that lane is not defended, it is not uncommon for Mercury to take 2 towers in a very, very short amount of time. So there you have it, guys. Hopefully now when you see a Mercury on the enemy team, you won't get punched in the mouth. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Again, my name is TrendKiLL, and come check us out next week. We're going to be talking about Sun Wukong, the Chinese Monkey King.